What's up guys, welcome to Wasted Space and welcome back to Starting Airsoft, where, as you've seen, today I want to talk a bit about hop-ups, what they do kind of conceptually, what actually their role is in Airsoft, and how you can go about adjusting them and using them to your advantage, because they're really, really important, and even someone down for the very first time with a rental gun can adjust their hop-up and make their gun more accurate potentially, and definitely shoot a longer range if it's not already set correctly. So let's start off with what actually a hop-up is even doing. So please excuse my methods here, but I found this was the best way to actually show you what I'm talking about. So if we imagine we have the barrel of our airsoft gun up here, and the BBs are just going to come out the end as we shoot. And if there was no hop-up, so these BBs are just being propelled by air this direction, what would happen is our BBs would come out, and then almost immediately they would start to dip, and they'd dip, and they'd dip. Perhaps not as extreme as this, but as they go along, and then they'd run out of momentum and down to the ground. So you can imagine this would end up with a curve that looks kind of, it starts to dip really slowly, and then as it runs out of energy, down it comes. Which isn't ideal, and more importantly, this distance here, that could be as little as 20 feet. Airsoft guns without a hop-up effect shoot very little distance at all. So what a hop-up does is apply backspin to the BB as it's coming out of the barrel. So instead of coming naturally out of here, when they come out, they've got momentum, like this. And what this means that instead of just falling immediately, they're actually spinning against the force of gravity. So the trajectory then ends up looking much more like this. Looks similar, a bit straighter here, you'll notice. The main difference will be this will now be 75 feet or 100 feet. So they can make an enormous difference. They're hugely important to how far your gun is going to shoot. And because of this, adjusting them can make a massive difference. So this is loosely what they're doing. They're applying the backspin. How do they go about doing that? So I'm going to do this in a way that's hopefully fairly generic and applies to all guns, because there are different types of hop-up depending on which gearbox you've got. There are even some proprietary hop-ups that only are in certain guns. But the main gist of things is they always have a way of adjusting them from the outside, unless you've got something super specialized like some of the sniper hop-ups. So this is basically what we're talking about. This is a hop-up with the barrel still in it that's come out of one of my other weapons. And what this is sort of this unit here is what we're talking about, that's actually doing all the work. So what I'm going to do quickly is do a very, very bad drawing of a hop-up. So we've got this bit here, which is the bit at the bottom. And this basically just leads to your magazine. So your mag is down this direction. Then behind that, we've got sort of this bit that follows out, and this is where your barrel and everything happens, really. And then I'm going to ignore this little bit up here, because this is basically just there to hold the mechanism. So, and this is the bit that changes between guns. So if you just picture this, there's a little bit that sticks out the back there, and it looks a little bit like that. And this little bit here, this little overlap, is because this is where your gearbox is. So this is where all the air is coming from. So the way the hop-up actually works is there is a little lever, and it kind of attaches within this mechanism back here. And I'm terrible at drawing this, I've tried many, many times, but let's just, there you go, little lever attached back here, and on this lever is a sort of nubbin. They're actually called a Hop-Up Nub, and they sit just there. And what that's going to do is push, this is what you're adjusting, and that pushes down into this whole chamber. But because that couldn't just sit in the barrel, it would interfere with how things travel, there's one more really important component, which is one of these little rubber things. These little boots that sit around the barrel. You can kind of imagine that around that end, wrong end obviously, but you can imagine how that sits around the barrel. And what this does is handle all of the air seal within here. So this is sitting here, so I'll try and draw that on in a way that doesn't look too terrible. So we've got our sort of boot that comes in here, and then about here it sort of does this. There's a little knurling on the end. And what this is designed to do is hold the BB. So the BB's come up in here, you've got our BB sitting here. I am really bad at drawing, but we've got our BB sitting here. And it's just held against these sort of the lips of the hop rubber until such point as something pushes it beyond. But the other thing this hop rubber is doing is allowing, via a little window cut into the barrel just here, so you can imagine there's actually a little sort of cutout for it within the barrel, is allow this to push in against the rubber and bulge it a little bit. So this rubber ends up with a little bulge at the top. And as the BB travels down past this bulge, you can imagine it causes friction. So we've got this BB sort of travelling to about here, and you've got friction from our bulge, colour this in so it's a bit more clear, pressing against the BB and causing this backspin. So you kind of get an idea, hopefully, how these sort of components interact. And more importantly, how there is areas in here that can be really important. Part of it is, of course, adjusting this lever. So depending on how this is adjusted, and it's adjusted using, on this one, there's a little dial on the side. On this sort of style, sometimes you have a wheel like this one. On other ones, there's just a little slidey lever that sticks out the side of the gun. For example, AKs work like that. And if I just quickly show you on my M4, this is not just here for candy. So for this one, for example, any M4, any V2, this is a V2 gearbox, and almost all of these work identically. You will have either a catch button, normally this thing, or in mine, it uses the bob handle, pull that back, and you can now see that's revealed that same little cog, and you can see how this could be sitting about there. And the magazine feeds into the bottom of it. If you're ever unsure about where to go to find this, just ask someone at the site. They will not mind. Even if you're like first time down there, you're renting a gun, hop-ups, the only way to damage a gun with a hop-up is to turn it on too much, so that this bulge comes too far down in here and starts basically causing too much pressure in the whole system. So be aware of turning it up too high. But to be honest, you're never going to do that. So let's get rid of this. We've seen a bit what's going on in the hop-ups, and this is pretty generic to all of them. So finally, what are we actually looking for from the hop-up? How does it affect our range? We've seen a bit how it affects our range, but what else is there to it? And how does it affect our accuracy? So first up, you've got range. And you'd imagine that when you're setting your hop-up, you've set this thing up correctly, you've adjusted the dial until it's just right by looking at your shots, and at the end you'll get a trajectory that looks a bit like this. Travels along, and then at the end, she dips down. Now this is fine, and this point here could be, that could be 75 feet. Good range. However, it's not necessarily the perfect way to set up a hop-up. So there's one other way you can do things that's more geared towards range, but if you learn to use it can be really good, which is to set up your trajectory more like this. So you have the BBs coming along, similar to this, flat. This is where the momentum of the BB is perhaps the most powerful force. So there's still loads of momentum coming along this way from the air from the gearbox. So it's keeping it level even though it's spinning backwards. And it's going to continue along, and to, say, this point here, just before we dipped, was 65 feet. It's going to spin along, and then it's going to get to that dip point. This is the point where the speed, the momentum, and the spin of the BB is just given up against gravity, and it just drops. However, the spin is actually the more powerful force at this point, because it's lost so much momentum. So if you can set your hop-ups ever so slightly higher than this, you end up with a trajectory where at this point, it then rises a little bit instead. And if you get it just right, you have a really smooth arc down here. And more importantly, this, and I know this is getting out of frame now, this is now 100 feet. So it can be really good to set up your hop-up like this. And the only way to do so is by looking. And I've tried to get some footage so you can see kind of what this looks like from the shooter's perspective. But that's kind of what you're gunning for. Now, how does it affect accuracy? Well, firstly, you've got this little rubber bit here, which is an air seal. So if this is not very good, in fact, this one's out of the gun because it is terrible. This is the worst hop-up rubber I have ever encountered. However, if the air seal between this and, say, let's get this one out, that is not very good, then obviously you're going to end up with leaking air, which is never great in guns. In these guns, you don't want to lose any air. You want it to stay where it is. But more importantly, if these cogs move around and they aren't stable, they move between each shot, then instead of getting lots of shots like this, where, at 95 feet here, we've got our dude, and you can reach him, with every shot. And if you were to aim, for his chest like perhaps you should, you're going to hit him in the chest with every shot, as long as that's not moving. But as soon as that moves, your next shot does this instead. Up into the sky and then drops like a stone. And then your next shot does this. So you can see how this needs to be quite tight and quite well done to actually make sure things are accurate too. But that's a subject for another video, because this was more about how it works and how it can benefit you adjusting your hop, and more importantly, quite how important this little block is in your gun. It's one of the most important parts of the whole gun. We're going to come back to that in another video where I can talk a bit in depth about how you can make your hop-up better. For now, I hope this helped. I hope the weird production method didn't freak anyone out. If you did like it, then of course, please hit me up down below with comments. Please hit like, please hit subscribe, really helps me in the channel out. If you didn't like it, then obviously hit dislike, you know where that button is. And of course, there'll be more Airsoft content coming really soon on the channel. So thanks a lot for watching, guys, and I'll catch you next time.